Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the show. Real quick here before we get started, we have just finalized the plans for the next Inner Circle meeting, which is going to be November 7th and 8th in Tampa. We are on a wait list. If you want to learn more about that, go visit hardmoneymastermindinnercircle.com, and we hope to see you in Tampa. Okay, today we're talking about the top level roles inside a private lending company. And what we mean by that is there are a few functions, critical functions of this business that the owners, the decision makers, the people who have real risk in this company, in these deals, should be handling themselves. And we're going to go through a few of those. And a lot of the function of a lending company can be handled by staff, right? Definitely a lot of the keystrokes, a lot of the movement, no problem there. But there are a few key things that we want to dive into.
Yeah, I think a big mistake that a lot of private and hard money lenders start out with is they think that they can just jump into this space and scale this company very big, and do so without a lot of risk. And this isn't to badmouth mortgage brokers or real estate agents, but and I was both of those years ago, so maybe I do have the right to say this. But I feel sometimes, if you've ever grown a real estate agent business or real estate brokerage or mortgage broker business, you don't really have a ton of risk after you close the loan, sell the house. And in our space, you do have a lot of risk. You have a lot of risk until the loan is repaid. So it's not just, hey, I'm just going to hire this great salesperson who is great at originating loans, or I'm going to hire this great real estate agent who is great at selling houses. They were top performing. They know a lot of people. And then they just do deals, they make a fee, and then they're done. And that's kind of the opposite. This is every deal that you do is investing in an asset, investing in an investment, and you've got to see it through, right? You're not just writing a loan to a real estate investor, getting paid a fee, and then moving on. You have your own capital and other investors' capital at risk. So the loan has to perform. So you got to wear that hat of, hey, I'm going to be a good salesperson and I'm going to generate good business, take care of my clients. But you also have to wear that banker hat of, I'm the one that's putting up the capital and I'm the investor. And I need to make sure this deal sees its way through. And I think that's where a lot of people fail. And in essence, they want to scale and they want to automate this business too quickly without diving in themselves and kind of doing the heavy lifting. And I don't know. I think it's a mistake. I think some of these jobs and roles that we're going to talk about, I think is imperative for the business owner to be involved in and really learn in and out, just to kind of see how their private lending or how their hard money lending operation is going to go.
So let's dive into number one. Number one being underwriting. And there's different ways to describe this. It's setting your level of risk. It's determining the right loan amount on a given property. Whatever you want to call it, that is a top of the food chain job because you really are determining the capital at risk and the company's risk and everything that you're getting into. And there are definitely companies out there that make the mistake of outsourcing too much of underwriting. For example, property valuation. There's nothing wrong with getting an appraisal, a BPO, a third-party opinion of value. Nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, you should have it in your file, but actually being comfortable with and knowing the value of the property so that you can determine a safe loan amount, there's probably no more important job than that. And this goes all the way up to, we're friends with a guy who has a $500 million fund, does all commercial lending, and that right there is his most important role. He is looking at, third-party valuations, determining his own stuff, having his analysts come up with numbers, and then he's making the final call on what is this property worth? What loan amount are we going to do? Boom.
Yeah. And that's not to say don't order appraisals and don't trust BPO agents or real estate agents. You can get whatever due diligence and whatever, letters of opinion or and any report that you want, but ultimately Whoever has the economic interest in the deal needs to make that decision. And that's you. You have the economic interest in the deal. The appraiser doesn't. The appraiser doesn't know what the credit score is of the borrower. The appraiser doesn't know, if this borrower is going to perform their capacity. They just know what potentially this has the potential to get to, right? Appraisal is an opinion of value. It's what potential could this property be worth? It is your responsibility as the owner of the business and the underwriter and the one who's responsible for capital to determine what you believe the value of the property is. And keep in mind, you can have loose metrics and guidelines, but there's no algorithm that you're following to determine what you're going to lend on each deal, like an institutional backed capital source or a bank would do, right? They have a metrics that comes out and a pricing engine that works. Our algorithm, our metrics is our head and our past experiences and our gut feel of what we believe the property is worth and how well we believe that the borrower can execute and at what time frame. That's how that works. Yes, when we're scripting and we're talking to real estate investors that need loans up front, we tell them, hey, we'll lend up to 80% of the purchase price, up to 100% of the construction costs. It's supposed to be at 65% of the after repair value. And that's true for the right situation. But a lot of the deals might not fully meet that setup. And okay, well, now they're going to have to bring more cash to the table, or maybe they have to bring a co-borrower to the table, or maybe they have this, or maybe they have that. There's not one metrics that works. A lot of this, and I hate to say that this is gut feel because that's not necessarily always the truth, but at the beginning, you got to get on the phone and you got to talk to borrowers and see what questions they ask and see how you make them, see how they make you feel. And, but our 4 C's obviously are collateral, character, capacity, and credit. Character being very, very important. And it's hard to judge character unless you're talking to the borrower or meeting with the borrower. Eventually over time and experience, you can potentially have somebody in your office that's helping you with that. And then you kind of sit down with them on deals that are going to proceed to determine, how you feel about it and which ones you want to do and which ones you don't. But it's hard to learn that and judge that up front unless you're the one that's actually doing that. And unfortunately, it's not all that sexy, at the beginning, right? It takes time.
It's heavy lifting. Yeah.
But it's just like anything else. If you were to invest in a business, if you were to invest in whatever, an asset,
stock, anything,
how much due diligence would you do? And if the answer is I'm just going to let, someone else do it and I'll just be passive, that's your choice. But in our opinion, it's a very, very high level job to run and scale a hard money lending company or a private lending company by you being the underwriter.
Yeah, for sure. That number one, first and foremost, underwriting. So we have 3 total. At least I have 3. We'll see if you had the same list as mine. Number 2, investor relations. People with capital, high net worth individuals, they want to deal with the principals. They want to communicate with the decision makers. It's fine to have certain aspects of that, like accounting is a big part of investor relations. Absolutely, you can have staff handle that. But the maintenance of the relationship and also answering some questions and, in essence, really just taking care of your investors' needs, we believe should be done by the principals of the company. And this one, I don't think we have to hammer this one home too hard. I think that is typically the case with most of the lenders that we work with in the mastermind group and inner circle and everything else. It was more like underwriting. I think people outsource a little too much. I don't think people are overly outsourcing investor relations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, not at this scale. I mean, I think they do that when they're buying big multifamily projects or doing syndications. They hire
IR people
team to potentially do that. But I just think that kind of organically the business owner is going to be involved in that, or they just are, right? Yeah. They're either putting up some of their own capital, they're trying to raise capital from their sphere. Organically, it just kind of happens that they fall into that role, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, it should be that way. And I think most of the listeners and people watching are pretty clear on that one. I want to talk about a third one, and I'm going to call it certain aspects of default management. When a loan goes into default, which if you do enough of them, it's going to happen. We're, always managing a handful of default situations, and they vary a lot. The part that you can outsource to staff would be the, day-to-day basic relaying information to your lawyers and communicating with them on some, mundane and routine kind of stuff. You can absolutely have staff handle that. But in default scenarios, there are going to be business decisions to be made. And the lawyers aren't there to do that. And that's not something I would give to staff either, because these situations are tricky. Like, for example, you're getting near a foreclosure auction sale, and the borrower, who's now the seller, is able to sell on their own. And how do you handle that? You push it back? Like, do you discuss a lower payoff amount, a negotiated payoff amount that's not the full default? These are all business decisions that happen all the time. Or other things. You can sell a note. You can, a borrower just declared bankruptcy. What does that mean for us? Like, these are things that it's going to be best handled by the principal of the company. And I've said this before, people hear me talk about this in training. Like, lawyers are very good at legal work, but their job is not to make business decisions for your defaulted loans. And that's not their job. That's not what they're there for. And they get a little complex, to the point where we have group discussions, the partners in HMB, about, hey, how do you think we should handle this one? Put our heads together and come up with the best path. And then who knows, 4 weeks later, something could change, and then you got to make another decision. So certain aspects of default management, I think, should be handled by the owners.
I mean, that stuff happens every day, where we're communicating and being creative of like, hey, what should we do in this situation business wise? Right.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, we work with a lot of different lawyers on the front end of loans and on the back end of loans. And, the best way is to get advice on legal advice of, hey, what are my options here? What are my options there? Like, let's be honest. If you don't have a lot of room in, if you don't have a lot of equity built up in a deal that you're doing, like, you got to be careful if you want to do a full blown foreclosure or collect on a judgment, or or if you want to try to help the borrower potentially just sell the property on their own or do a deed in lieu. Like, a lawyer can give you legal advice on that, but that might not necessarily be the right angle, right? If you don't have a lot of equity in a property, like, you might not be able to go through a full blown out contested foreclosure, because you might lose your shirt. You might have to get more creative and figure out an alternative way to do it. So, and that's just an example.
We had one just yesterday and today, where we're negotiating a payoff amount for a borrower who's in default foreclosure, a contested foreclosure, and somehow got his bank, because he owns a lot of property, has a lot of loans with them. He got his local bank to do a refinance, even though he was in foreclosure. Fine. Great situation. Way better than having to go to an auction sale. Way more predictable. And we negotiated the payoff amount. And it came out to 17% being the interest rate that we're going to collect. There's a lot of back interest owed instead of the default rate of 24. And our note rate's normally 12.99. Totally fine. Perfectly good exit. And then at the very last minute, there were some additional fees and stuff added to the settlement statement. He had to bring a bunch of cash to close that he didn't have. And he reached out to me, and on the fly, I changed that 17% to 16.5, because I can make that decision. I know it's totally fine. Nobody else in the operation, well, besides, Jason, none of the staff in the operation is going to be able to make that call and to be able to, like, actually, make the changes in the system and, get everything lined up for a settlement that was happening real time. It was happening then. We got the wire an hour ago, and this conversation was happening yesterday at the end of the afternoon. So just another example of default management stuff that's high level, and that, the principal should be on top of.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, there's lots of different roles inside the operation. And when the time comes, when you need to free up time and potentially you have the budget to do it, start bringing on staff. That's great. You're not gonna be able to scale until you do. Typically when you get to about $5 million in a loan portfolio is usually when, you start bringing on somebody, and that usually can help you to get to like 10 or 12, unless you have a business partner, and that can get you like 10 or 12. And then you start bringing on somebody else. I mean, listen, inside this business, you got origination, you got processing, you got underwriter, marketing, accounting, servicing, inspections, investor relations and stuff like that. And, you got to figure out, besides like what you want to do and what you're good at, the highest level stuff to make yourself responsible. And I know I talk to too many hard money lenders and private lenders all over the country, and I ask them questions that I feel like they should know the answers to, and they don't sometimes, because they're like, oh, I need to ask this person or this person. I'm like, what's their involvement? I'm not talking about like keystroke type of stuff. I'm talking like full business stuff that I feel like they should have their minds wrapped around. Like, hey, I'm about to go to foreclosure sale. It's like, okay, cool. What's your gross payoff? Like, what's the minimum that you're willing to take? What do you think it'll sell at foreclosure sale for? Like something that I don't believe just a staff member should help with, something that I think really you should be involved in. Because let's be honest, like, and if you have capital from a capital investor involved, they're going to ask you those questions, and you need to know the answers to them as well. I think that's important. So, this might be short-sighted, but like, in my opinion, in Chris's opinion, like, I'm going to be underwriting loans forever. Chris is going to be investor relations forever. That doesn't mean that, we're not going to have potentially help with other stuff. But I mean, that's what we've done for 17 years.
Sure.
And, it's high level and it's important. And I think you can still do that the right way. And it doesn't take a ton of time. If you have experience doing this and you've done this countless and endless times, underwriting a file, and that doesn't mean like, hey, I'm doing all the keystrokes and making sure everything's prepped perfectly. I'm overviewing a file to make sure everything's there, everything's, accurate. It's a deal that we want to do, right? You don't have to do all the keystrokes. We're not talking about keystrokes. You can do this potentially from wherever you want, with very limited technology. If you have it organized the right way and you have the right people in place to help you, it's just important that you're making those ultimate decisions.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the reality of this business as we see it. And we know this game pretty well after being in it for so long. And the fact of the matter is it's an owner-operated business. Why? Because there's real risk in this business model. There's real capital involved. And making sure it's done right is just paramount. It's not the kind of thing like where we're selling, T-shirts, or we're an info business or something like that, where as long as the numbers work and the revenue works, you can have it entirely operated by staff, right? You can even hire a CEO and be nothing but the owner in stuff like that, because it's just a different model. It's just, selling a product or service, and there's not real risk involved. Not the case with ours. So that's why we believe that we're going to be running this thing forever until maybe the next generation takes over. We'll see. And then having the right team in place to handle a lot of the heavy lifting, keystrokes, phone calls, day-to-day stuff is, the best way that we see it, and the best way we know how to run it.
And I think a lot of lenders kind of get frustrated that they want to be removed, but it's just like, I don't think you want to be removed. I think you want to be removed from part of the process that's a pain in the ass, that sucks, right? Like a lot of folks, when they're at the 5 million, maybe a little bit more, they're like, man, sick of talking hard and processing loans. I agree. Paper, putting, loans together and processing them and making sure everything's in place and ordering title is a pain in the neck. Like, we have a processor / portfolio manager that handles all of that stuff. I had to do it for years. I agree with you. But after you have all that stuff to get, apart, like, you think Chris wants to do like a direction of investment form for, a self-directed IRA, investor that we have stuff on? No. But
Sure
like,
don't.
you do it up front, you train and you teach an employee to do it. And then it's just kind of, on a high level, managing, making sure some of that stuff's in place. So, and I get it. Like, it's hard on the front end or short term, because it does take, a budget to hire good staff, and it takes time to do some of those stuff. But just remember, there's a lot of different tasks and roles inside a private lending company, and just make sure you're doing those top ones, or work your way. The goal should be to work your way up to doing those top level ones. And it'll be a good, profitable, successful business. Listen, one bad deal or two bad deals, knock on wood, could put somebody out of business, and no one wants that to happen, right? It's very different than, you're being a mortgage broker and selling a loan, and then whatever, it defaults, and it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. It does matter, but like, this is losing real capital. There's real capital on the line, and that's not to scare anybody or prevent somebody from getting into this business. The point is you got to be responsible and, know what role you should be involved in.
Absolutely, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you are doing some smart and safe and profitable loans out there. And we'll see you next time here on the Private Lenders Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.